Perfect.
Brilliant.
I guess we're good to go. And I'm handing over to you, Pamela, for the introductions. Welcome, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Teresa. Hopefully you can all see our screen that Teresa's just kindly shared. As Teresa just mentioned, welcome, welcome. It's great to see so many people from across the world joining us this evening, even here in the UK. But I presume it's a lot of different time zones, but nonetheless, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. Um, Planning your digital strategy for 2021. That's what we're going to talk about today in this session. The session has been brought to you by Lightful and Candid. We obviously we'll try not to spend too much time talking about 2020. We know 2020 has brought up a lot of challenges for the non-profit sector, as well as the everybody around the world. But we'll try and focus today's session on looking at taking some of those insights that we've learned from 2020 and looking at how we can implement them into our digital strategies for 2021. So that's going to be the focus of the session today. We've got some, you'll be joined by Teresa, who you can see, and also David from Candid. We'll, just before I get started actually with the introductions, I thought might be useful just to do some housekeeping. So just to let you know that the webinar itself, or this session, is being recorded. So we will make sure to share the recording with you all after the session in the next couple of days. Also, we'll share along with the recording the slides, so you can have access to those, so you don't need to frantically note down everything that you see in your screens. The chat box, as a lot of you have already done already, if you could just jot down, say a quick hello, jot down who you are, where you're calling, where you're joining from this evening, that would be really helpful. And just a reminder, when you're using the chat box, if you could, in the little blue box above where you enter your text, if you could select panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your comments or your questions. We'll try and pause throughout the session today for any questions. We'll keep an eye on the chat box and the Q&A function as well, if you have any questions, but we've set aside some time at the end for questions. So yeah, we'll post your question in the chat box or in the Q&A, and we'll come back to you in the Q&A section if we don't manage to get your question straight away. Cool, so we'll start off with some introductions then. So I'm Pumalo. I am one of the relationship managers. I lead up the relationship management team at Lightful. I'll tell you a bit more about Lightful in a second, but I mentioned I'm joined on today's call by Teresa and David, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Dave Holmes. I am the programs manager, the Midwest for Candid in our Cleveland office, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Candid in just a second.
And hello, I'm Teresa. I'm doing marketing at Lightful, so it's really good to see some familiar names that we worked in the past.
Brilliant, thank you both. And if we jump onto the next slide, we'll start off with just giving a bit more of an intro into Lightful for those of you who aren't so familiar with us. So as you can see on your screen, Lightful, first and foremost, we're a technology company that builds digital products, digital services for beyond profit organizations. So we work in three, or the organization is split into three main parts, which you can see in your screen. So one of the key products that we've developed as an organization is our social media platform, which is a social media management tool that allows non-profits, social enterprises to manage their social media content from one place. So you can post through multiple social media platforms from one place. You can see your analytics in one place. And we'll share a link to a bit more information about the social media platform if any of you are interested in that as well. The other part of the Lightful wheel of tools is the Bridge program, for which my team, the relationship management team, is responsible for. So the Bridge program is a digital capacity building program that seeks to help nonprofits, usually small to medium-sized charities from around the world, really discover and utilize technology and digital as a way of communicating their work, showcasing their work, building their awareness, and increasing their fundraising. So it's a 12-month program that is split into 4 quarters. Each focuses on a slightly different theme, but the overall aim of the program is to help you as nonprofits better tell your story and better communicate your impact with your audiences so that you can increase your fundraising and have, which it will enable you to have more impact as an organization. And then lastly, the last part of the business is the lab side of things, where it's more of a consultancy based working system where we work with larger foundations and organizations to build customized digital solutions. So things like CRM systems, right through to whole digital transformations. So we do quite a lot at Lightful in there, various bits of the business. So please do get in touch if you want to know a bit more about either of those kind of work streams. Cool, thank you, Teresa. If you just jump onto the next slide. So we'll just pause briefly. I know a few more people have joined. I just want to scroll through the chat and just see everybody said hello.
Yeah, still at the introductions. It's really good to see so many attendees all over the world.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, and it's great to see, actually, Teresa's mentioned there's a few people on the call who have taken part, who are currently taking part in the Bridge program. So you'll know all about that. Recognize a couple of names there. But yeah, hello again. Excellent. So we'll jump on to the next slide, and I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk to you hopefully a bit more about Candid and planning your digital strategy from their perspective. All yours, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pamulo. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Holmes. As I said, I'm with Candid. If you don't know about Candid, go to the next slide and I'll start telling you about it. That's me, by the way, just in case you wonder what I look like, I'm there. Candid is an organization that came about because of the combination of 2 nonprofits in the United States that have been around for quite a long time. Foundation Center, where I originally worked, has been around for over 60 years, providing information on philanthropy and private giving, putting together a database called the Foundation Directory Online, and helping people find out how to write grants and how to connect with funders. We could join forces with GuideStar, which has been around for a little over 35 years, to become Candid last year. GuideStar has been the center for information on American nonprofits and has a listing of all the nonprofits in the United States. So we have joined forces to share our information and combine our expertise. And next slide. So if you're interested in learning about that, Candid continues to do the things that we have always done, and now we're doing them together. So we do research on nonprofits and grant making and helping people find the funding that they need and deal with different situations. We do collaborations with organizations like Lightful. We're very glad to be on this today. And we do regular trainings throughout the United States and the world, connecting people to the information they need to do good. And that's the little sign behind me there. You can see what our mission is, and that's very basically what we're here to do. So next slide. If you haven't taken a look at Candid's website resources, I would encourage you to do that. These are just a couple of them. These bit.ly links will take you to information on Candid Learning, which is where we have our training interface. Also, we have a resource page specifically about dealing with COVID and it's the situations that people find themselves in and nonprofits find themselves in. So there are grant opportunities and trainings and requests for proposals listed on our Candid COVID-19 resource page. We also have some great resources on racial equity, which we've put together. So I'm so glad to be here today and tell you about this. Next slide. Candid and Lightful. So this year, we are very pleased to announce that we are working together with Lightful to partner to offer United States nonprofits access to Bridge. And as Pamela was saying, the Building Resilience and Digital Growth and Engagement program. It's a program designed to help and equip small and medium-sized nonprofits with the digital competence and confidence that they need to become more resilient and to deliver greater impact. We know that nonprofits have the greatest stories to tell, and we want to help you better tell those stories using digital and social media and reach a wider audience. Support for the program was provided by the Fidelity Charitable Trustees Initiative, and it's going to begin in February 2021. If you are interested, you're not already involved in the Bridge program, look for more information on this program very soon. Next slide. So we love the idea of pairing with Lightful to do this program because digital strategy is terrifically important for 2021. I found lots of articles, lots of commentary about this coming out of the COVID situation where people have had to make many changes. The basic feeling is that digital is much more important than it ever has been and will continue to grow. Mobile fundraising will matter more than ever. More and more people are moving to virtual events. They're using the data analytics that they're available to really target what the program is that the programs are that they're doing. And of course, they're looking for AI-powered personalization to meet up with people directly, the ones most likely to be interested in what they're doing. So everything I've seen says that this is an important topic, and we're glad to share it with you today. So I'm going to turn it back over to the Lightful team. You'll see, by the way, there's a number of our staff members from Candid on the call today. Michelle from our West Coast office is here today, as well as I. So if you need to reach out to us, please do so and send us a chat. We're glad to be here. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, David. So back to me now. I promised at the start that we weren't going to dwell too much on 2020 as a year, but just briefly, I wanted to touch on some of the things that we've learned at Lightful from 2020 so that we can then look at some of the key learnings and what we need to take forward into 2021. So bear with me as I do a bit of reminiscing on what's been quite a challenging year for the nonprofit sector. One of the first things which will come as, or perhaps not come as a surprise to a lot of you on the call today, is the fact that digital is no longer optional. So we don't really have a choice as nonprofits in terms of embedding and using digital as part of our strategies. So looking forward into 2021, it's been really evident from the events of 2020, mostly brought about by the coronavirus, which has swept the globe, that digital should be embedded in everything from culture and infrastructure to data and our ways of working. There's actually not even an argument for when we're coming to design our strategies, thinking about digital first. I don't really lean too heavily into that, but I do think it's a really, really important part of our wider communication strategies and marketing strategies, and certainly our fundraising strategy. It's such a vital call because it gives us opportunities to be more accessible. It allows us to reach wider audiences, often allows us to speak to audience members where they're most comfortable. So when we're thinking about designing our digital strategy, something that we've learned from 2020 is that we need to think about using an audience-led approach, and it's vital, and it certainly has been vital in these uncertain times. Digital is also great because it actually allows a lot of creativity. Creativity is booming through embracing things like gamification, quizzes, other interactive content. There are loads of useful tools to consider when thinking about the way you speak about your nonprofit and the way you try and increase your nonprofit's brand. So digital allows for this creative space. So that's why it's a really important thing to start considering and start thinking about embedding into your organizations. An important thing that we have learned though from 2020 is not just to adopt digital and just run with the first thing that comes to your mind, so your first strategy. It's really, really important when embedding digital as part of your wider communication strategy, to use it as a way of testing out and trying new ways of bringing your audience closer to you. It's really important to see what's working, what's not working, and digital lends itself to that. So whether it's through different analytical tools, through social media. You can get a clear understanding of what your audience is responding to you, and it's that real-time analysis that allows digital to be really, really effective. And if we jump on to the next slide. Another key thing that we've learned from looking back at 2020 is that virtual events can work, and they do work. So virtual events have emerged and evolved during lockdown, and we should really consider how these will continue to be part of charity activity or non-profit activity moving forward into the future. They give us the opportunity to take smaller in-person events, which are still, I think, going to be vital once things settle and once we move out of lockdown. But digital gives us the opportunity to take these smaller events and add a wider audience, an online audience. It allows us to kind of balance the best aspects of both physical and virtual events. So I think what we might see emerging in 2021 is a hybrid of virtual and digital events. But so whether it's things like galas, sporting events, fundraising events, digital allows us to do that, but also allows us to do it in a way that we can spread it to wider audiences. And next slide, Teresa. Another key learning, which again will probably not come as a surprise to a lot of you, is the fact that it's so important now more than ever to diversify your income streams. That old phrase, which I hate saying, but I will have to say it, don't stick your eggs in one basket. Individual giving, major donors, trusts, corporates, institutional donors. It's hard to think of an income stream that actually wasn't impacted by COVID-19 in 2020. So keeping all your eggs in one basket, I can't actually remember what the phrase goes. I think it's keeping all your eggs in one basket and keep all your eggs in one basket and the storm will knock you over. But it is so true when it comes to your income streams. It's really, really important to make sure that you're using digital as a way of diversifying your income stream. So as I said, as I just mentioned with that earlier slide, it's important to try new things, test new ways of drawing new audiences to your organization, engaging new audiences, so that you're not solely relying on one income stream. That's been a key learning, and I think that will be vital going forward into 2021. Next slide, Teresa. And again, I'm not really breaking the bank with some of these, but it's something that we've really learned from 2020 again is the fact that it's so important to retain donors. So donor retention is really, really important, and it has been so important over the last sort of 12 months or so. And I think here of that, the analogy of buckets of water, and you're pouring more water into the bucket and you're trying to plaster the holes in the bucket. I always think about that when we're talking about donor retention versus acquisition. Donor acquisition has been at the forefront for nonprofits for years and years and years. It can sometimes be really, really expensive, but we find ourselves in this pattern of wanting to constantly get and acquire new donors. And we often forget about the most engaged supporters, volunteers, and donors. We often leave them behind and stop communicating to them. I think one thing that 2020 has shown is that it's really, really important for us to keep our engaged current donors at the forefront of our minds. Charities and donors need each other like never before, and amidst all the angst and anxiety, I think a deeper bond has formed. So we need to utilize that bond. We need to continue to communicate to our recurring donors and encourage our new donors to turn into acquired donors. If you think about your current donor base and you look at the number of monthly donations that you get versus the amount of new donors that you get with each campaign, for example, if you think about increasing your monthly donor base by just 1%, have a look at that. And it's a really useful exercise, actually. If you just work it out, look at your monthly donor base, increase that by 1%, and have a look at what that actually does for your monthly or your yearly income. It's a really clear indication that regular donations, regular individual donors are vital to helping us as nonprofits continue to prosper and grow. And next slide, Teresa. I'll finish off on a positive whilst we're looking back at 2020, and that's just that donors still want to give. Now more than ever, people really understand the role and the need for nonprofits around the world. They understand and they want to help. And we've seen some amazing emergency campaigns these past few months, which is proof that if you pitch it right, people are open to being asked. And actually, just very recently, we within Lightful, we're looking at the numbers of the Giving Tuesday campaigns, and I think Giving Tuesday versus 2020, Giving Tuesday 2020 versus Giving Tuesday 2019, there was an increase of I think 28% in terms of fundraised in the US alone. I can't remember what the figure exactly was. If you remember, please do shout out, Teresa. But yeah, it's proof that although there's everything else happening in the world, donors still want to give and they still care about our causes. It's just about how we frame and contextualize our causes amongst everything else. During the first few months of lockdown life, it really did seem that the sector was in a crisis of confidence. But you guys are fundraisers, and the fundamentals of fundraising still apply despite everything else going on. We've had our eye on it's, as I say, it's just about trying to constantly contextualize your cause and your message so that you're framing it in the right way so that it's catching your potential donors at the right time for them to give. And I think that's it from me. And I'll smoothly transition over to Teresa, but I'd be really interested to know, what were some of your challenges from 2020, but importantly, what are some of the things that you've learned for 2020? Please do comment in the chat. Whilst Teresa's speaking, I'll keep an eye on the chat and see what some of those challenges and learnings were. Over to you, Teresa.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Pomelo. And yeah, please feel free to share your learnings from 2020 and what resonates with everything that we're going to talk about, because it would be good also to hear from you. And there will be also time for Q&A right after these tips. So right after 2020, and obviously it wasn't the easiest year and definitely not the most straightforward one, we want to think ahead and we want to start thinking, how can we plan for a year that we can't tell for sure what's happening, but we still need to have the strategy in place. So looking at 2020, and obviously there were many challenges and many lessons learned, it's important now that we have a little bit of a better idea of what's happening to start being a little bit more proactive. So obviously we knew that 2020, we really had to react. And now is the time to start thinking, how can I use all my lessons to actually learn and start thinking a little bit further than the next week or the next month. It's obviously still challenging.
I can use the telephone. I don't know how to use it.
Can you have a look, Pamela, with the sound?
Yeah, those are there. Where is it? I don't know where it is. I think it's in the garage. Oh. I think it's in the garage. It's in the garage, yeah.
Good.
Sorry about that. I think we're good to go.
Always challenging with Zoom. It's totally fine. And yes, it's good to start thinking, how can you be more proactive? How can you use the learnings from 2020 to think ahead in a little bit more strategic way? So a good idea to start the year right is to have some sort of review. And obviously 2020 wasn't a normal year. So it's good to go back and start with an audit with all your content and all your channels to see where you are and what you want to improve. Could be your website, your social media, your email, might be SEO or your content in general. So based on what you changed the last year, or maybe something that you haven't worked much, have a think of your overall digital footprint and all your available channels, your followers, where they are, and how you can really make the most of them. It's definitely the best time of the year, early in January, to start having some sort of analysis before you jump into the strategy. So then you want to have a think, do I really know my target audience? Is there something that I need to change? So think comparing to last year, or maybe the last time you thought of your target audience in your campaigns and your messaging in general. Who do you really want to reach, and what are the best channels to actually reach them? And something that also obviously came up from last year, how have their habits really changed from one year over the other? Because obviously there were more people who were spending times on the screens, and we don't have the commute time now. So there are many changes in terms of the best times to reach them, or maybe the best channels. So it's good to start thinking how 2020 and everything that changed really affects your strategy. And then, of course, there were so many changes the last year, and the budget and the staff changes were quite a lot that they have definitely affected your digital strategy and your planning. And this is probably the best time to break down any silos, any problems that might have prevented your organization from being more collaborative. Or maybe start thinking, how can I approach more partnerships, and try to think how we can really make the most and help each other rather than competing with one organization and the other. So the end goal is pretty much to use all your available resources and try to find common ground between different teams or even different organizations to make sure that you make the most of your existing resources. So then thinking of 2021 and more practically how to maintain a successful digital presence, let's look at some tips. And it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's always good at the start of the year to think of the ideas that can get us a little bit further compared to the previous year, or just to review where we are and what we want to improve. So obviously it might be a busy period right now. It might be Giving Tuesday, end of year, Christmas campaigns, anything you're working on is always the time of the year that we're focusing a lot on fundraising. So then in January, you want to have a step back and think, how can I focus again on building the community and focus on the engagement so that I'm able to prepare for the next fundraising ask or anything else that I want to ask. So it's the perfect time to be more authentic, start being more interactive, try to listen more to your audience and start paying more attention what they want, how they behave, or what can you really learn from them on different channels. And make sure you set up an engagement plan, or if you already have one, start thinking, is there something I need to change, something that might not be working, or maybe something that I want to improve. So have a think more on the community building and how is that relevant to your overall objectives for the next year. And then, of course, storytelling is very important when it comes to campaigns and fundraising, but stories are everywhere, and it's good to start organizing them as much as possible. It might be about working on the themes, on the existing stories that you're telling, or maybe something that's changing and you want to reflect your messaging and how is that affected. And it's always better to do that on a quiet time, because I know when it's about the campaign planning process and fundraising, we're just jumping into too many things. So this is the good time to start organizing them, have a spreadsheet or a folder for your visual assets, and start thinking of your current stories and be critical. What is working or what can you improve? It's always good to remember that it's not about you, it's about your supporters. So it's not just about telling stories about your work, which of course you want to communicate the mission, but you also want to tell the stories that really connect with your supporters. So you want to connect the emotion with the action and of course sharing the impact. So have a think again at your quiet time and maybe get the team together to improve your storytelling to make sure that it's more effective in the new year. And then it's also relevant to what we mentioned earlier in terms of breaking down the silos. You want to make sure, as Pamela said, that you try to engage with your donors and you cultivate a relationship. It's way easier than donor acquisition, but of course it needs some planning. So have a think of your supporter journey and how can you make it a little bit lasting longer. So it's not just about one win, it's not just about one campaign when someone donates. You want to make sure that they create a relationship with you that lasts for a long time. So it's a good idea to start thinking it's not just about fundraising to treat them like donors, they're also your supporters and they're also interested in finding out more about your updates. So you want to blend comms and fundraising to make sure that your message is consistent and they are aware of everything that is happening. You're not just communicating with them when you want to ask for your next campaign. So you want to think like them. What motivates your donor? Or what are the best channels to reach them? Or how can you make sure that they stay up to date with everything that's happening? So it's probably a good time again at the start of the year before you get busier with the next campaigns to have a think on how you can really improve your supporter journey and how your comms and fundraising can really come together. And then something that's also very useful, and it's the best time to do that when starting the year or when you're ready to review your strategy. It's important to try and set specific goals, of course, but it's not just about the long term. It's not about thinking, for example, the next 12 months. You can split your goals, your objectives into the next month or even weekly by weekly if you want to have very small objectives. And it makes it definitely easier to start narrowing it down in different ways that are just helping you be more consistent with your work. It's not just about looking far ahead. You also want to make sure that you don't lose your focus on the short term. And it's also something that we discussed earlier. You want to make sure that you want to make the most of your channels. It's not just about saying that let's all start using TikTok because it's very popular. Of course, that's a great idea. But we also want to make sure that we use the right channels that make sense for us, for our teams, for our skills, but also for our supporters. So again, using the digital audit to think of your channels and what you're currently using, what's working and what can be improved. You want to have a look at the channels and find the most active ones. So pretty much the ones that work well for you right now. You don't want to lose them and you want to make sure that they stay as successful as possible. And then you want to think of the channels that maybe your supporters are spending more time on a different one and you haven't invested that much of your time. So if you realize that there is a shift within the channels that you're using and some new ones, then you might want to explore how can you make this transition. And then of course, it also comes back to the skills. If you feel that you're not comfortable with Twitter and you prefer Facebook or Instagram, then that's also a case of you and your team knowing that I feel that there is a skill gap over there. And if I see that my supporters are shifting to a new channel, then I might want to focus again on upskilling myself and my team to make sure that I still stay on top of the trends. So then let's look at 5 practical steps, just some actions pretty much to get started with the new year on how to boost your digital presence. I feel like it's probably that time of the year that I talk a lot about content calendars, but it's also the right time to do that. There's no better time than the start of the year to think of your content, to think of what you want to communicate, and start getting a little bit more organized. So obviously the process depends on what you prefer. You might want to use spreadsheets, you might want to use tools like Trello or anything that gets the team more organized, or you might do that directly through the tools that you're using specifically for social media, email, CRMs. And then at the end of the day, you want to have some sort of calendar of what's coming up. It could be about the campaigns. It could be about blending different channels and making sure that everyone is aware of what's happening so that you're trying to be both transparent and also more effective. And again, it's all about collaboration and outreach, really. And I really like spending the start of the year to try to connect with partners, with organizations that we might have worked in the past, or maybe other charities that we might have found a great opportunity, some common ground. And it's actually cost effective in a sense, like you don't necessarily need to spend, for example, the amount on advertising that you would spend. But there's also, again, the manual work on actually forging the partnership and treating that as any relationship. It's not just about going to someone when you want to ask for a favor. You just want to make sure that you make it as natural as possible. So have a think of your network, start mapping it out and think who actually is part of your own network? How do you define your network? Sometimes when we don't really realize it, we actually know more people than what we imagine. And there might have been others who expressed interest in your organization and your work, but you never really started a conversation. So it might be a good time to have some extra chats at the start of the year. And we started mentioning about that earlier in terms of this planning and have to be short and longer term. It's really useful to think of the small wins. It's not just about communicating the impact at the end of the year, or obviously the importance of the financial planning, But you also want to focus on your team and narrow down your objectives to very small and practical goals. This is a great idea because it obviously makes the measurement easier. Instead of just measuring your success every other month, it's good to keep track of what's changing and what you want to improve. And it's also a great idea to just celebrate your wins, even if it's a very tiny win. If you just got 10 new followers, if that's part of your objectives, that's still great and you need to celebrate that. It's not just about making the long term and the big goals. You really need to stay on track and have a think on what works better for your organization. And then at the end of the day, you make the goals less intimidating. You don't need to say, I want to go viral. And I'm not sure if we use that term anymore. And make sure that you just focus on very small wins. And then you realize once this builds up that you actually have more chances to reach your bigger targets. And something that we also mentioned earlier, it is important the way things change very quickly nowadays. You want to review your messaging. Have a think, how is your messaging coming across now? Is it still relevant? When was the last time that you reviewed that, the way you create content for your channels? So it might have been adapted, for example, communicating your mission and the challenges around COVID-19, or it might have been the last review as part of your campaign. But we know that things are changing and every organization has different paces. So it's always good at the start of the year to review the ways you communicate your message and start thinking, how can you stay relevant? How can you also think of your supporters and possibly what they expect from you to make sure that you create the most effective message for them? And then the last bit for today in terms of ideas, experimentation is always important. Of course, it doesn't mean that we should scrap all our strategies and start trying new ideas and performing experiments. So it's probably safe to say you can keep 90% of your time on what's working well, because you obviously want to make sure that this is what you're focusing on. But keep at least 10% on experimentation on a weekly or monthly basis. It could be about trying new content ideas, or maybe change the messaging, try out some new visuals, maybe images, videos, or short and longer content, or even around advertising on how you want to focus on a very specific experiment. So it's up to you really to decide what you feel that you want to try out, but try to write down the learnings. This is also very important. It's not just about running experiments, but maybe have a spreadsheet or something to communicate with your team to try out new ideas and use afterwards the ones that worked well for you. So these are pretty much the ideas in terms of 2021, and we want to make sure we continue the conversation again with Candid. So we're going to have another webinar specifically on capacity building for 2021, and this is on the 19th of January. Let me share it at the chat. And now it's time for questions. Haven't looked at the chat yet, so let me know, Pamela, and of course, feel free to ask anything around what we discussed today.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Teresa. I'll just scroll up through the chat and see if we have any questions. We had a great question come in from Christine Rodericks. Christine has asked, can you share an example of finding common ground between objectives?
Could you explain more, Christine, on how we can help if there's any specific challenge on your side? So just to explain in general what I meant on that case, when we're talking about finding common ground between objectives, it's about making sure that if you have one goal about awareness, for example, increase your number of followers or subscribers, and the other one is specifically around fundraising, it doesn't mean that these two should be completely different. So if you set, for example, 4 objectives in total for your digital strategy, you should have a think, how can I complement one another so that it don't just act completely independent?
We had another question, which I attempted to answer in the chat, but it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on it, Teresa. Louise commented saying, the problem that they've had this year is that they're quite a young organization, so they don't really have a large following in terms of numbers and social media platforms. So their posts that they send out aren't really being seen by that many people. Is any ideas in terms of, I think one of the things I suggested is, to kind of focus your objectives on, or being really realistic about what your objectives should be. And it kind of ties in with what Teresa just mentioned, but how can you lean your focus more on growing your audience as opposed to fundraising? So rather than, having a specific fundraising campaign, should your focus, the focus of your campaign being increasing your Facebook followers or increasing your Twitter followers? What are your thoughts on that, Teresa?
Yeah, I agree. It's probably a good start. First of all, as you said, Pamela, to be realistic. And of course, when you're at the start, you know that any small win is very important. So keep track every week or every month on the changes, and again, celebrate the small wins. And it might also be useful what we mentioned in terms of mapping out your network. So that doesn't need to be scary. It's just having a think of those that you know. And it might even start from your friends and family and those who know about your organization, and start involving them more in the process of the outreach, especially at the start. It's very useful because these are the ones who know your organization, and it's important to have a think and have a plan in mind on the different ways that they want to support you. So instead of you just posting on your own channels, they could also be part of this, and try to connect with the friends of the friends to keep the network going and make sure that you grow your audience in a more relevant way.
And we've had a few more questions come in that I'll try and read out. So Surites, and I'm sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly, she added a comment saying, currently most of our supporters are quite old. First part of the question, how do we find out what channels they use? And two, how can we be of service to help them learn new digital channels? It's a really interesting question.
How do we find what channels they use and how the best of service to help them learn? I think it's probably good to think of your existing channels. And again, we discussed on the importance of being digital. But as you've said, if the audience is old, you just want to find a way to go where they are. So what is working right now, or what do you want to improve in a sense of like how they behave? So obviously you don't want them to go on the platform that you are using on your own. You want to go where they are. So you probably wouldn't find them on Instagram, for example, and that's totally fine. So you might start with some assumptions that they might be spending more time on Facebook, or they might not be easy to find on email. You might still want to rely on some offline resources in terms of direct mailing, or maybe even through phone. As again, it's what works better. Start with what you know, and you might want to test some ideas and some channels and see if they're working. And if not, you'd better focus on what's safe, really. You don't want to just try too many channels if they're not the best options.
Yeah, I completely agree, Teresa. I think there's sometimes this tendency to think because this channel is available, we must be on this channel. And that's not necessarily right. I think it's really, really important to talk to your audience where they are. So as Teresa mentioned, if they're not on Instagram, there's no point you putting loads of effort into Instagram. But I do think the second part of your question, Sriti, is really interesting in that how can we be of service to help them learn new digital channels? I think it's again, you have to look at the benefits of them being on those digital channels. So explaining that to them. So being really transparent and saying it costs us lots of money to send direct mailers out. We can give you this information by email if you share your email address with us. So helping them understand what the benefit of moving to that other channel is, I think that's really, really important, and that will help kind of bridge that gap between where they currently are and where you want them to be. But I think first and foremost, it's really important to talk to your audience where they are.
have a question from Pamela for Dave.
Yeah, hi. So Pamela is asking about Candid. Specifically, Candid is now GuideStar and the Foundation Center. It's the other way around. Foundation Center and GuideStar have been nonprofits in the United States for many years, and we are now Candid as of 2019. So we've combined our forces, and we are working this year in a partnership with Lightful to bring the Bridge program to nonprofits in the United States. So looking forward to sharing more about that in upcoming emails to United States nonprofits, and also through the next webinar that we're having in January. I put the link in the chat for everybody. So thank you.
Excellent. A couple more questions that have come in. There's another interesting question from Sariti. What concrete strategy can you recommend to win new newsletter subscribers? We have the barrier of data security laws in Switzerland. We have many emails in our CRM, but can't import into MailChimp. Well, that's interesting. That's tough. I won't claim to be an expert on the Swiss data protection laws.
I think in general, because obviously we're not experts on the specific case, it's good to try and cross-promote, pretty much use the other channels if you want to specifically build the newsletter. So if you have some different channels, it could be social media, it could be through your website, to make sure that it's very easy to find, and also provide the reason. It's not just about having the form and you just expect everyone to sign up. Think how we all sign up to a newsletter. There should be some sort of justification that you're going to get updates, or you might want to reassure them that it's not going to be new emails every day, or that there is something different to expect compared to your social channels. And it makes you feel closer to your organization because you receive more updates, or you might receive something special. So it's good to provide, again, a reason for someone to subscribe.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent answer, Teresa. I think you have to be a bit creative with that reason. So think about how is that benefiting your audience member? How is them subscribing to your newsletter going to benefit them? Is it that they're getting exclusive content that they won't be able to get anywhere else on your website or your other channels? So really try and spell that out to them when you're asking for their data, so that they can hand that over willingly. A few more questions. I'm just conscious of time. If I missed any questions, Teresa, can you?
Looks like there's a couple in the Q&A panel.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Roz has asked for some tips for building engagement with online communities. That's something actually that we've seen quite a lot of a growth area in 2020. Would you have any tips for that, Teresa?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think online communities are also going to be important in 2021. And it was pretty much the way to connect with many people really through 2020. And I'd say the most important thing is consistency. It's easy to create a community and it might be active in the beginning, but you need to have an engagement plan and you want to keep it active. It could be about having some ideas, asking some questions, maybe try to involve them more into your planning, or reach the stage that they feel comfortable to interact with each other. So you need to be the moderator, but you also want to empower them to feel that they're still interacting on their own. So there's definitely some work, but it's really important and it's really worth the investment. I feel more important than ever, really, to grow your communities.
Yeah, and similar to what we mentioned earlier, it's really important to try and do that in a space that your audiences are comfortable with. So, is it a Facebook group? Is it a WhatsApp group? And again, just think of the data privacy implications of all of that. But making sure that you can provide that space and facilitate for that space on a channel or on a platform that they're comfortable using. Last couple of questions. Christine has added another question. A lot of times it's hard to engage with our audiences given the amount of work. Could you recommend how much time a team should give during working hours to engage in social media with their audiences? Should there be different days assigned to different channels?
Good question. And of course, it's really subjective. It depends on the fact, on the number of team members that you might have, or if it's your only job, because obviously there are not many social media managers in charities, and it's more about the comms role. So in that case, if you don't have a team, I understand that we can just say you need to spend 10 hours a week on that. But I feel like if you're able to dedicate some time, even if it's half an hour a week, or just 10 minutes a day, really, I think that's more important to keep an eye on what's happening on the conversations, on the mentions. There might be any comments that you want to keep an eye on. So it's better to have a look even once a day for a few minutes rather than just remembering that, let's say, once a month. So it shouldn't necessarily be time consuming. It's more about having the reminder to monitor what's happening and try to be part of the conversation. Welcome.
And last question from Pamela in the Q&A. So something our social media strategist has mentioned about Twitter is that they don't have many followers. They've mentioned that this platform is more about being controversial instead of informative. Anyone have this experience? I'll let you answer that actually, Teresa, because I know you do a lot of work around, reclaim social and using social for good.
So obviously Twitter is a little bit of a controversial platform, as all of them really, but still it can be very negative and of course time consuming. But I think it goes back again to your objectives. What channel makes more sense for you and your supporters? If you feel that the engagement is not really there, or if it doesn't make sense based on how you use digital channels, then you don't necessarily need to be part of that. And I don't think I would recommend being controversial. I think that's actually the problem with Twitter. We want to make sure that we try to be informative. It's not just about getting the engagement by being controversial. So if you feel that it doesn't make sense based on what you've seen for your organization, it's better to focus on the channels that are more relevant for you, really. Questions that we've missed?
Oh, there's one actually from Sariti, which we'll finish on. Can you recommend tools to organize stories and visual assets that all team members can access and contribute to? Currently, it's buried in a million folders. I've often, having worked in various roles in communications and fundraising and charities, I've often struggled with that problem myself. And actually, something that we've developed at Lightful that I mentioned at the start of the session, the Lightful social platform. Within that platform, there's actually a space which is called the Media Library, where you can store media, imagery, videos that all team members that have access to the platform can access and use. There's also a space on the team on the platform, sorry, for team collaboration. So you can join the Lightful platform and sign up to the Lightful platform as an organization. You can assign different team members roles. So you might have someone as an admin, which is sort of the all singing, all dancing account. They can, comment, post, schedule, posts to go out on social media, or you can have colleagues with lesser access who can only perhaps schedule or edit content, and they would have to get approval from the admin before they actually sent anything out. So there's a lot of space on the platform for collaboration, and it really helps with planning, scheduling, and gets over some of those challenges that come with things being in different places. So I'll send you a bit more information about that, Sariti, but yeah, have a look at the Lightful social platform and see if you can make that work for you.
Perfect. I think we've answered all the questions. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. And again, thank you very much, Dave, for our first webinar in terms of partnership with Lightful and Candid. I'm very
Thank you.
excited for the next steps. And again, hope to see you again on our next session in the new year. And we'll make sure we send everyone the recording over the next days. And we'll make sure we also have a blog with some takeaways so that you go back at the start of the year and start thinking of the things you want to improve. Thank you very much again and have a great day and talk to you soon.